Think about this. Every few years, some politician proposes raising the minimum wage, while another proposes a stimulus check, a type of universal basic income.
We will finish the job of getting a total of $2,000 in cash relief to people who need it the most. The $600 already appropriated is simply not enough. We just have to choose between paying rent and putting food on the table.
Different politics, same instinct. Give low-income people more money and their lives get better. Makes sense, right? Here's the uncomfortable part. Both of these ideas fail the people they're trying to help, but they fail for completely different reasons. These are policies that sound great on paper. They aim to help us when we're financially struggling, except they don't. They never did. At best, they have no effect. At worst, they funnel money towards the rich and worsen the wealth gap. I know this sounds counterintuitive, but all of the evidence proves this. In this episode, we'll cover minimum wage, the Kenya UBI experiment, and the Trump-Biden US stimulus check catastrophe. If you think these conversations are as fun as I do, hit that like and subscribe button. My name is Chris, and this is The Think Report. The standard story on minimum wage goes like this. Raise it and low-wage workers take home more money. Case closed. Here's what actually happens. When a city forces employers to pay more wages, those employers don't just eat the cost. A lot of them pass it straight to the consumer in form of higher prices. And who's buying coffee, groceries, and fast food from the same employers? The same low-wage workers who just got the raise. When politicians advocate for minimum wage increases, they're claiming that they're magically making money somehow. Businesses are not going to eat that cost, though. They need to maintain their profit margins by either reducing costs or passing it on to their consumers. Seattle is the best studied example in the US. The city phased its minimum wage up to $13 an hour in 2016. Researchers at the University of Washington tracked what actually happened to low-wage workers using state administrative payroll data. Not survey estimates, actual quarterly earnings records. Hourly wages actually went up 3%, exactly as it was intended. But hours worked in those same low-wage jobs fell by 6 to 7%. Employers in this case didn't just raise prices, a lot of them cut shifts. The net result was total monthly pay for low-wage jobs in Seattle actually falling by an average of $74 a month. Like I said earlier, employers will either pass their increased cost on to the consumer, or in this case, cut costs by employing for fewer employees. And here's the inequality angle that nobody talks about. When minimum wage goes up, it does compress the gap between the lowest earners and the average worker. Seattle's data shows that. But the income of the richest earners goes up by a larger percent. Thus, overall inequality in Seattle between the richest and the poorest actually widened over the same period the minimum wage was rising. This is called cost push. The employer's cost goes up, and that specific employer adjusts through prices, through hours, or both. Universal basic income has been tested on groups of people, and many are claiming that it's proven to work. However, the core flaw of these studies is that if you gave one group of people extra income while everyone else earns the same as before, of course they're happier. That's a real critique. Economists actually have a name for it. The difference between partial equilibrium effect, what happens to the person who got the money, and a general equilibrium effect, what happens to everyone once that money starts moving through the stores, landlords, and other people's wallets. Money takes time to circulate, and once it does, prices will move to absorb it, wiping out most of the benefit and making things worse for people who didn't get the transfer. That's a testable claim, and it's actually been tested deliberately at scale exactly for this reason. In rural Kenya, a nonprofit called Give Directly worked with a team of economists to run the single largest test ever done on this exact question. Not does cash help the person who gets it, that part's been proven a dozen times over. The question was, does giving cash to some people raise prices for everyone else nearby? They designed it specifically to catch that effect. Over $10 million went to more than 10,500 households across 653 villages. In some zones, 2/3 of villages got the money. In others, only 1/3 did. Deliberately varied so researchers could measure spillovers into surrounding untreated households and businesses. The transfer size wasn't small relative to the local economy either. It came at about 15% of the entire village GDP. And they didn't just check the prices the week after. They tracked them monthly, over roughly 2 years, specifically to let the money cycle through the local economy the way a skeptic would expect it to. They even measured how much economic activity that money generated as it recirculated. Spending, respending, small businesses popping up to catch the new demand. The multiplier was 2.4. That means for every dollar transferred, it generated $2.40 in local economic activity. And after all of that, 2 years, a 2.4 multiplier, 15% of the local GDP injected, local prices moved by an average of just 0.1%. Not 10%, not 1%, 0.1%. If your model of the world is cash transfers just get inflated away, this result should bother you a little bit. It bothered a lot of economists, bothers me. So why didn't it happen the way skeptics predicted? Here's the piece that actually resolves the disagreement. It's not about time. The Kenya study gave the money plenty of time to cycle through the economy. It's about slack. Rural Kenya had underemployed labor, an idle capacity just sitting around. When demand went up, businesses didn't need to raise prices. They hired the people who were already there but underused, and that grew output instead. That's literally what the 2.4x multiplier is measuring. Real economic growth, not inflation. A capacity-constrained economy like North America doesn't have that option. When there's no slack left, when the workers are already employed, the factory's already running, the shelves already being restocked as fast as they can be, new demand has nowhere to go but prices. So the real question was never, does cash transferred to households cause inflation? Instead, it's, does the economy receiving that cash have room to grow, or is it already maxed out? The United States already ran this experiment at scale in a fully capacity-constrained developed economy, and we have the data. Between March 2020 and March 2021, the US government sent 3 rounds of direct payments to nearly every household in the country. $1,200 under the CARES Act, $600 in a second round that December, and $1,400 under the American Rescue Plan in March 2021. In total, 472 million payments, roughly $817 billion, sent straight to people's bank accounts. Not through an employer, not tied to any company's cost structure. Exactly the outside funder scenario. Now, watch what happened to prices. This is US inflation, month by month, from January 2019 through the end of 2022. Notice 2019, boring, stable, right around 2%. Then COVID hits, and you actually see a dip in inflation in early 2020. That's the demand collapse, the exact opposite problem. Then track 3 vertical lines, the CARES Act, the second round of checks, and the American Rescue Plan. Watch what happens to the curve after each one, specifically after the third, the biggest round in 2021. Inflation climbs almost every single month after that, cresting at 9.1% in June 2022, the highest reading in 40 years. Correlation, of course, isn't proof on its own. So let's look at what economists who actually modeled this found. First, this wasn't a global inflation story that the US just happened to share. By February 2022, US inflation was running at 7.9%, nearly double the UK's 5.5%, well above Germany's 5.1%, and more than double France's 3.6%. Every developed country dealt with COVID supply shocks. US ran hotter than nearly all of them. Researchers at San Francisco Fed pointed directly at one difference. US households got significantly larger direct cash payments than their counterparts in other rich countries. Second, the more rigorous piece, a New York Fed staff report actually found a structural model to separate demand side effects from the supply side effects. They found that increased demand accounts for roughly 2/3 of the modeled inflation over this period, and fiscal stimulus specifically accounts for 1/2 of that demand side share. Put simply, a meaningful chunk of the worst inflation in 4 decades traces back to direct cash payments landing in an economy that had no spare capacity to absorb them. And here's where it actually hits the people the whole thing was supposed to help. By March 2022, wages were up 5.6% year over year, a real solid raise on paper, but inflation was running at 8.5%. The net result was real inflation adjusted wages fell by roughly 3%, even while nominal paychecks were going up. Sound familiar? It's the exact same trap as the minimum wage story. A raise on paper quietly erased by the cost of everything else rising around it. Put these situations side by side and the whole disagreement collapses into one variable. Rural Kenya, roughly $1,000 per household, injected into an economy with plenty of idle labor and capacity. The result was 0.1% of price inflation. The demand got absorbed as real growth. The United States, up to $3,200 per adult across 3 rounds, injected into a developed economy already near full employment. The result was a meaningful share of a 40-year inflation high. These two outcomes are completely different because one economy had room to grow into the demand and the other didn't. So here's where this lands. Minimum wage increases mostly fail because the cost is concentrated. One employer, one set of workers who adjust through either cutting hours or passing the prices on to the consumer. It helps the bottom rung temporarily but worsens inequality. UBI and broad cash transfers don't fail the same way, but they carry a different risk entirely. In an economy with no slack left to absorb demand, it can turn into the exact kind of inflation that erases the gain for all of the people it was meant to help. And inflation itself is regressive, since the people holding the cash lose purchasing power while the people holding the stocks and the real estate mostly keep pace or sometimes even come out ahead. They're different mechanisms, different points of failure, but the same lesson. Minimum wage and UBI make the same promise and break the same way. The number on the check goes up and the value of the dollar goes down to meet it. Think about that.